you. One of the things that is important to us is that we want you to have God's word in your hands. So if you don't have a Bible today, if you raise your hand, one of our team members would be more than glad to bring that Bible to you. If you own one, hey, just leave it back at the back when you're done. But if you don't own a Bible, this is our gift. Our church buys these so that you can have God's word, so that you can walk with God, know God, and have the understanding of his plan for your life. And so as we're walking in this series, last week we talked about the idea that love gives. And love gives broke out from the passage of John 3:16, for God so loved you and me, that in that moment, what did he do, church? He gave. He gave his one and only son. And so we talked about that idea that God gives so that we love to give. And today we're going to pick up with the idea of qualities of a generous person. And this is one of those series that, man, as we're here, for some, it's like, oh man, here it is. But I'm going to ask today that you open up your Bible, that you walk with me and you hear God's scriptures, that you go home and you study these. Because there's a section in time, and see, this year, if you were here with us, or if you go online and go to our YouTube page, the idea for this year for us as a church of believers is that we've wanted to challenge you to grow in God, to know God, to experience God, to truly lean into God and to feel God's presence. But that means that you're going to be challenged. We've challenged the idea of our families and raising kids. We've challenged you in the idea of leaning into faith and being courageous and bold, not in yourself, but in God. We've talked about the idea that imperfect people stepping out and trusting God in these faith moments, and then the idea that we need the armor of God. And today we're in a section where Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and he's trying to get them to understand because, man, they've made these commitments, they've said these things, yet there's no movement. And so we're going to pick up in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 6, and then we're going to move to verse 7. It says, So we have urged Titus, who encouraged your giving in the first place, to return to you and encourage you to finish this ministry of giving. And verse 7 to me is something that we all need to hold on to. He says, since you excel in so many ways in your faith, your gifted speakers, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, and your love from us, I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving. I mean, what I find amazing of this is that this is where we would usually do is we're trying to find the positives. And so he's highlighting those. And we would think that, hey, man, isn't that good enough? You know, our faith is strong. We have good teachers. We have knowledge, wisdom, understanding. We have passion. We have empathy for others. Yet Paul is challenging them and saying, no, that isn't good enough. I want to challenge you personally, not the entire church of Corinth, not the entire city church. I want you as an individual sitting in this room to trust God, experience God more, and lean into God more. And so he says, I want you to become or to excel in this idea of generosity. I know that you thought about giving. I mean, I know that this was a concept because of what you pledged, but you never fell through with it. I began to think about this passage, and then a few weeks later afterwards, I got the privilege to go to a volleyball game. And I'm sitting there at the volleyball game. Listen, I don't know that much about volleyball. I'm not very experienced in it, but we had some church members who played, and so I was there in the front line, and if you know me, I was as loud as I normally am. I'm cheering, and I'm hollering, and I'm screaming. My daughter's telling me, Daddy, it's time for you to be quiet, and that just kind of encourages me to get louder and to scream more and to dance more. And all of a sudden, this young girl got hurt. This young girl sprained her ankle. And church, listen, you might walk out after this moment, but I feel like there's a moment, I need to be honest with you. I'm sitting there, this young girl has got hurt over there. And in my heart, my head is like, I should do something. Yet I just kept watching. A young girl comes over and picks this girl up, begins to carry her. I would like to tell you at this moment that I pushed everyone aside and I said, hey, have no fear because Pastor David's here. I did not. I continued to sit there. As the woman next to me said, we should do something. in my head, I was like, you're absolutely right, we should. And I scooted just a little bit off of that bench. But I continued to sit in that moment. And as I was preparing for this series, I watched this girl carry this other girl, and I did nothing. Now, yes, you can shame me later. But what I want you to hear is how many times in our lives do we see our world hurting? Do we see our people struggling? And we're sitting there on that bench and we're thinking, man, somebody needs to do something. I probably should do something. I probably should use the 2 legs that God gave me. And listen, I might look like a fool and try to carry her, but I should do something. Yet we sit by and we wait to watch what else the world is going to do. We talk about the idea that the devil tempts us to do so much. Be careful because the devil's out there. He's like a roaring lion. He's seeking to destroy. He's seeking to tear down. He's seeking to take. But have you noticed that he has never tempted us to be generous? I've never had that inkling from the devil to be like, oh, you should do this. It's going to be really good to go buy some diapers and fill them in this donation station. And so what he wants, what I want for us is to be generous, but we usually hesitate and we don't become great at anything by accident. Like we don't improve, we don't grow, we don't, become better by accident. It's by continuing to move and do and learn. A few weeks ago, my mom had knee surgery, and so, again, another just moment of transparency. So I got up really early, about 5:30, and I said, man, I am not going to wake up my family, and so I'm going to sneak out of the house. And so I drove by the McDonald's over on 192. I got myself a sandwich and continued to drive to Jewett Orthopedic where my mom was having surgery. I got there. Talked to my mom, had a great conversation. Actually talked to the person at McDonald's as well. Hey, who else is going through the drive-thru but me that day? And I said, hey, I hope you have a great day because I'm going on a long trip. But as my mom was being taken back, we began to meet with different doctors and have different conversations. If the young man who I met at McDonald's was then my mom's surgeon, I would have been like, hey, listen, we're not doing the surgery today. This is off. What are you talking about? I'm capable. I've watched tons of YouTube videos. I've done other things, right? No, my mom's surgery was done by a renowned doctor who is one of the leading doctors at Jewett in this new research department. It was crazy. They didn't even put her to sleep. They gave her some Bose headphones. And the anesthesiologist said, listen, your mom loves to talk. And I said, hey, listen, that's the family gene. We all love to talk. What I'm trying to get at is that, man, we say things like we want to be better at giving. We want to be better at generosity. We want to be better at helping others. Yet at some point along this journey, what are we doing to exercise that? Because we only get better by practice and repetition. I don't think that I've ever heard someone say these words, I accidentally became irrationally generous. Like it just smacked me, and so I did this, because we are naturally selfish. 2-year-olds, what's one of their favorite words? Mine. Adults will help each other if you'll help me. In marriages, I would love you or support you if you will first fill in the blank. The only way that you can become great at being generous is if you begin to plan for it. If you begin to plan for it, to think ahead of it. Isaiah 32 verse 8 says it this way. It says, but generous people plan to do what is generous, and they do what, church? Stand firm in their generosity. Man, what an important topic here. What an important thing for you and me as we lead our homes, as we lead our families, as we teach our kids that to be generous people, we have to plan. Well, that's crazy, right? But it's not, because you and I, we plan. We plan on the vacations that we're going on. We plan when we're going to do a kitchen remodel. We plan those birthday parties. Yet, we're waiting for these unexpected, crazy moments to then become generous. One of the things that I love about this passage in Isaiah that it reminds us is to stand firm in their generosity. As a church, you might hear us talk about this over and over again, but one of the things that we want to do is to live out the principles that we teach. And so when we receive 10% every week goes out, 10% goes out to help others and to impact others, to see churches planted, to take care of widows and to take care of orphans. And sometimes we don't realize the impact, but when God's people come together, it is incredible to see what they have done. Do you realize last week we put out a commitment? Last week we are still praying over our brothers and sisters in Jamaica and lifting them up, hearing the horrific stories and the losses. But as a church, you gave $5,000 to help impact a community. Is that not awesome? But what's even better is because what we want to do is continue to see that move forward. And so last year, between July to July, because we run our fiscal year that way, you gave over $57,000, if we can put that slide up. The mission slide. Nope, next one. $57,712 went through these doors to help plant churches, to help people in Jerusalem, to help those devastated by tsunamis, to help West Virginia in a time of devastation, to help Thailand, to help Psalms plant churches and walk with pastors. Lake Aurora, unfortunately, because of a spit handshake, thought that they owned some land. They did not. You were able to give $10,000 to help that. You're able to train pastors and teachers in Cuba. This is, church, what we as a church are doing because of your faithfulness. Is that not incredible? What I realized early on in the last couple years is that you see it, God has allowed us to do so much. And we will sometimes sit here and be like, man, that's so great. But this is the moments where you and I have to be challenged personally. As a church, this is what God is doing, and it is incredible. But you and I have to faithfully begin to put these practices into play. If we can put that passage in Isaiah back up again, Isaiah 32, verse 8. Generous people plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity. They don't bounce back and forth. They don't stand or sit on the bleacher waiting or wondering. They begin in small aspects and they begin to grow, trusting in God and seeing God's provisions and seeing what God is doing. And as God continues to take care of them and provide for them, then we learn as believers, as followers in Christ, that as God has done so far, we will continue to grow in this. You see, the difference between giving and being generous is simple. Giving is what we do, but generosity, that's who we are. Giving is an action, and generous, that's being a mindset. You see, giving is that action, but generous is a mindset. And today, as we look through this passage, as we walk through this, I pray over you, as I've prayed over myself, that this would be something to challenge you and your personal journey with God as you are walking with God to trust God more. Because there is no topic that, like talking about money in a church. I realize it. My dad's a pastor. But friends, I want to see you grow in God. I want to see you know God more. I want to see you see how God can move and do things. And so let's look here in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 10. It says, here's my advice. He begins to talk to him. He says, it would be good for you to finish what you started a year ago. Last year, you were the first who wanted to give. Isn't that incredible? Man, you were eager. You were filled with passion and excitement. He says, you were the first to begin doing it. Verse 11, now you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now by your giving. And then he says this line, because this is important for all of us. Give in proportion to what you have. Listen, we're not asking for equal gifts, because in this room, we're all at different places in life. We're all in different financial situations in life. But give in proportion to what you have. Verse 12, whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly, and give according to what you have, not what you don't have. He goes on to verse 13, of course, I don't mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for yourself. I only mean that there should be some equality. 19, right now you have plenty and can help those who are in need. Later, they will have plenty and can share with you when you need it. In this way, things will be equal. As the scriptures say, those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. I've battled with this verse for so many years, because the struggle is we live in a world full of comparing. You might not remember this, but man, I still remember the day when people who came to Oprah's show sat in there and she did all these things, and all of a sudden she took them all outside and she says, you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car. I just wish I was there that day, because I was like, I need a car. And we sit in this world sometimes where it's like, man, that's exactly what I want to do. Listen, if that was my world today, I'd be giving you candy bars. And probably the snack size ones at that. But what I want you to see, church, hear me. God isn't concerned with the amount. God isn't concerned with the amount. He's concerned with your heart. If you're just pulling it out and you're throwing it in there, there's no trust, there's no reliance on him. You're just doing it because, well, this is what I've been taught and this is what I need to do. What Paul is trying to challenge the church there, as he's talking about the power and the might of God, is to lean in and to trust God more than you trust yourself. And for all of us, as a hard factor. Because for some of us, we could give a bigger gift, but the motives are wrong. And then you're not being generous. Some can only give a smaller gift, but the motives are right. And then you are truly being generous. See, it's not about the amount as much as it's about the heart. Generous people give willingly, but they also give proportionately. And that passage there in 11 and 12 of 2 Corinthians 8, he says, now you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you show in the beginning be matched now by your giving. And then he goes on to say, give in proportion to what you have. To one person, what seems like a lot, to others might not be that much at all. Man, I remember as a kid, every year, my birthday is January 16th, if any of you are taking notes, but my aunt gave me a card, and every year it was for $20. Listen, I thought I was rich. I thought I was like on top of the world. You got to watch out. Yeah. What we have to come to understand of is that we give in proportion to what God has blessed us with. And that means then we have to prioritize our portion. Leviticus says it this way in Leviticus 27, verse 30. He says 1/10 of the produce of the land, whether grain from the fields or first fruits of the trees. Help me out, church. Just read this with me so I make sure I get this right. Belongs to the Lord and must be set apart to him as holy. But David, you haven't seen my life. You don't know all the things I'm going through. You don't know all the struggles. You don't know, man, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. Listen, sister and brother, I hear you. But I also realize as I start to look at my paycheck, there's something that I've become accustomed to, and it's things. And if you begin working with Dave Ramsey or other financial peace systems, you start to understand that, hey, we don't need all these subscriptions. I don't need all these things. I want these things. What God is trying to challenge us is to lean into him more and to begin to prioritize God and put him as a portion in our life. That's why 1 Corinthians 16, verse 1 and 2, he says, now regarding your question about the money being collected for God's people in Jerusalem, you should follow the same procedure that I gave to the church in Galatia. He goes on to verse 2. He says, on the first day of each week, you should each put aside a portion of the money you have earned. Don't wait until I get there and then try to collect it all at once. I think to me, this is pretty self-explanatory. Why? Because, man, if you're like me, if I start putting things aside, I start getting different things I start seeing. Like I got to use. And in 3 weeks' times, I got to get 4 new tires, 2 on each vehicle. Things come and things go. Life is real. And the struggles, man, are there. And so what Paul is trying to challenge the church, that I'm challenging you, is that instead of saying, hey, well, you know what, I'm going to do this later. No, you do it now. You make it the first and foremost priority. And then you say, okay, God, listen, I don't know how you're going to do this, but I've got 90% of my paycheck, and here it is. I'm going to let you lead. You see, God will prove himself faithful. But church, you must have faith to trust him. You have to have the faith to trust that he'll come through. You know, I realize how controversial this conversation is in the church. And, you know, man, to all of our visitors, I hope that you are hearing that today that we are not coming after you, but challenging you to trust God. What we want you to do is to know God more, to experience God more. You know, what I want for you is what Megan and I have experienced in our personal lives. That the struggle is hard. That the struggle is hard. And for a quick moment at times, I want to take back control. That I want to take back control. But time and time again, God has shown his mighty hand and has blessed us beyond measure. You know, maybe today you can't get your mind around this idea, this 10%, that is crazy. And listen, you've already maybe begun to shut me off. But friends, we will never become generous by not giving. We will never become generous by not giving, by holding on to things that God has blessed us with. You are training yourself not to trust God with your finances. So I want to encourage you. Maybe instead of this idea of 10, which sounds insane, how about 3? What about 5? And as you see God's blessings, you continue to grow. You see, we bring this to God and we say, God, I trust you. God, I give you sacrificially. God, I don't understand or know how all these things are going to work out, but you do. There's a passage that has just always just grabbed my attention. It's in Mark chapter 12. It starts in verse 41. It says, Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple. And it goes on from there. It says, and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Listen, man, I don't do that. Never plan to do that. Just sit there like, yeah, okay. Oh, ooh. You know, Jesus didn't have much. Jesus moved around. But Jesus is sitting there at this moment just watching people. And so for so many of us, the thing is man, we want to be right on the outside. I want to look good. I want to be presentable. I want to make sure I've got all my pieces in a row. And he's watching these people. And he says, many rich people put in large amounts. He goes on to verse 42. It says, then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. First of all, She doesn't have anything. Her husband has passed. Jesus is recognizing all of these things. And in verse 43, he then calls the disciples over. And he begins to talk to them. And he says, I tell you the truth. This poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. And you and I would sit here and be like, well, wait, listen, I went to simple math, and 2 + 2 = 4. And so if they're giving large amounts and she's giving this small amount, well, that just doesn't make sense. You see, that's the problem, friends, is because we're always chasing the amount when God's looking at your heart. Like God's looking at what's on the inside. He doesn't care what's on the outside. And he says in this last verse, in verse 44, he says, for they gave a tiny part of their surplus. It didn't even affect them. It was just like a little toss in. It didn't matter. Maybe the number was huge, but it didn't affect them at all. It didn't convince them or move them into a moment where they're like, listen, God, I'm going to have to trust you to get through this day. He says, but she, and I just picture in this moment that he points to her, maybe as she's looking the other way. He says, poor as she is, has given everything she has. Everything she has to live on. She felt it. She felt it. And I want to ask you, church, when is the last time that you have given sacrificially? When's the last time that you have trusted God in a moment and you're like, God, I don't know, I don't see, I don't have all the things together, but I am trusting you to take care of and provide for me. As we've talked through this year, if we've moved through these passages, if you've got anything, Lord, help me to know you more, to see you more, to lean into you when the world is dark and everything is falling apart. God, help me to trust you more. See, it's more difficult for us sometimes in these moments to give sacrificially. But when it comes to our money, God never said, store up treasures on this earth. What God said was this. He said, be great at giving. We are great at so many things. So let's make sure we're also great at giving. You know, 36 years ago, I remember seeing this in practice. And about 22 years ago, I was at a church where we were going under this moment to plant and to build a family life center. And one of the families in that church didn't have a lot. They always had the car that was breaking down. Remember their silver Chevy Cavalier, the window at the driver's side would always leak when it rained. The Buick was from the 80s, and listen, if the AC worked, it was amazing. But they were always there to serve, always signed up for projects, but always willing to say, God, we are going to give to you. I remember this campaign, and the idea was building God's kingdom. What does God have in store for you? That family of 4 sat down together and they prayed and they said, God, what is it that you're asking for us? And I remember that Sunday when my parents went forward and put that commitment card in. Listen, friends, our cars were falling apart. We had rabbit ears. My dad would threaten the cable guy when he ever came by. But the thing that I will never forget is that he taught me and my brother to lean into God more than leaning to myself. As we close this day, I want to remind parents and grandparents We are teaching our kids how to live. What are you showing them is the most important thing? Is it more important the things that we have? Or is it more important to have a faith in God that is solid when life comes at us? And the only way that is going to be taught is by us applying it in our personal lives. Listen, this week has been filled with a lot of highs, but a lot of lows. And if you need prayer, I want to invite you. Our decision teams are going to be on either side. And maybe for you, it's just been a hard week. Man, financially it is a struggle, and I can't figure out how to get my groceries. Or, man, my kid is just not listening to me. There's a diagnosis that's happened in my home, and we're just trying to battle with this and work through this. Listen, this isn't a club. This is God's church. We want to walk together. And so today, if you need prayer, friends, walk to those sides and meet with those teams. If you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, the first thing you need to do is to say yes to him. And those people want to talk to you about what it is to trust him and to give your life to him. Would you stand as we sing this last song of invitation?